The sky that afternoon was pale, covered in lazy clouds dragging slowly over the old house's roof. Rosa moved gently through the rooms, as she did every day since silence had become her only constant visitor. She climbed the stairs to the attic with a shawl over her shoulders and a cup of tea in her hand, guided by an impulse she couldn't quite explain. She hadn't touched those boxes in years, but something about that day pulled her back in time. The scent of wood and old dust wrapped around her like a forgotten memory. She began sifting through the objects with care, her fingers brushing faded photographs and newspaper clippings sealed in paper envelopes. Inside a smaller box, tucked under carelessly stacked books, she found a faded blue hardcover volume. A poetry book she used to read when she was young, back when feelings didn't need permission to exist. She sat on the floor and opened it slowly, like someone opening a door that had stayed shut for decades. Between two time-stuck pages, something slipped onto her lap. A folded note, carefully creased, signed with a name that made her chest tighten. The name Miguel was right there, as if time had waited for her. Rosa shivered. She glanced around, almost afraid of being caught doing something forbidden. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the note. It was old, written more than 50 years ago. Miguel's words were filled with quiet pain and tenderness. He said he'd been forbidden to see her, but that his heart would always stay wherever she was. Her heart stumbled inside her chest. It felt like the past had just exhaled in the room. She read every line slowly, as if listening to a voice echoing from far away. The words held a weight that cut through the years and returned with new life. She wondered why she had never seen it before. Why had that letter remained untouched? A sharp ache pressed beneath her ribs, like truth waiting decades to pierce through. She pressed the note to her chest and closed her eyes. It was Miguel. It was really him, and it felt like he was speaking to her again. Suddenly, everything felt more vivid. The colors of the past returned with unexpected strength. The old garden, his brown eyes, the way he held pruning shears so gently. Rosa remembered the crunch of his footsteps on gravel, the scent of freshly watered roses, the whispered conversations behind the greenhouse. Memories the years had buried under layers of adulthood and duty, now rising like a river, finding its way back to the sea. She didn't know if she was crying for the beauty of what once was, or for the sadness of what never became. Both feelings blended in her stomach like a tight knot. She rose, letter in hand, and walked to the attic window. The street was quiet, as always. Trees swayed softly, unaware of the revolution unfolding inside her. She took a deep breath and tried to steady herself. But something had shifted within, and she knew nothing would be quite the same now. That night, sleep didn't come easily. She sat at the kitchen table with the letter in front of her, as if waiting for it to say more. She read it again and again. Her fingers lingered on the ink, as if caressing an old photograph. She thought about writing back, even if it was just for herself. But the words still didn't come. Only silence spoke, and it spoke in questions. The next morning, the first thing she did was open the book again. She needed to reread it, as if the words could guide her somehow, as if the letter was a key to something still locked inside her. She decided to leave the house and walk to the city square, a place she used to go to think when she was young. It wasn't something she planned. It was a pull. Like maybe by walking, she could reorganize what she was feeling. The morning wind brushed gently across her face. The streets looked the same, though the world had changed completely. Her steps were slow but certain. She carried the letter in her bag, like a talisman. When she reached the square, She chose a bench under a flowering tree and sat down. She watched people pass by, heard a bird's hesitant song, listened to the faint creak of a bicycle in the distance. She stayed there, just breathing, waiting. For what? She didn't know yet. The bench in the square looked the same, but it wasn't. Or maybe it was Rosa who had changed. She watched the world with new eyes now, as if every leaf, every sound, every beam of light carried meanings she had never seen before. Her hand gently touched the worn wood beside her, and a memory came rushing in. She used to wait there for Miguel, back when he'd leave work just to see her for a few quiet minutes. That was all they had, and still, it was everything. Her body was older now, but her heart, that morning, felt like it beat with the force of her 18-year-old self. She closed her eyes for a moment and let the old images wash over her. The garden behind her mother's house, the glances through curtains, the books he left hidden on the bench, and the letters she never answered. Rosa curled up slightly on the bench. That familiar ache crept back into her throat. She thought about the letter she had once torn apart without reading, out of fear. Fear of her mother, fear of society, fear of herself. She had been raised to believe that feeling too much was weakness, that love, when not approved, should be erased. But now, with the letter in her hands, it was all returning as if time had never passed. That love had never died. It had only gone quiet. She looked at the tree in front of her and smiled. It was the same tree under which Miguel once gave her a single rose, saying she was more beautiful than any flower in the garden. She hadn't replied. She had only blushed and looked down, the way she always did when she felt too seen. And now, decades later, here she was again, not sure if she was chasing memories or seeking answers. But something inside her whispered that she needed to return to the places, the scents, the images that had stayed frozen in time. She stood up slowly. Her body followed without resistance, almost guided by something deeper than logic. She wanted to see the old garden again, to know if it still held anything that belonged to them. She put on no mask, no pretend reason. She simply walked, feet steady, heart trembling. When she turned the final corner, her breath caught. There it was, the house. Different, yes, but still full of soul. And the garden. Oh, the garden. The gate to the old house was open, rusted, and creaking like it too held secrets from the past. Rosa approached slowly, her heart pounding like it was the first time. The garden was only half cared for, but in one corner, almost hidden under dry leaves, she saw a single red rose still alive. It was impossible not to recognize that flower. Her eyes welled up. That spot was where Miguel had spent most of his time. The memory hit like a wave, her mother's voice, sharp and cold, slicing through the air. "You can't mix with that kind of person, Rosa. Think of our family." The girl she had been shrank beneath that voice, even now, so many years later. It was as if her mother still haunted that house, peeking through curtains, judging, controlling her steps from beyond. Rosa had never disobeyed, and she paid for it with her soul. The solitary rose stood as a quiet rebellion, still blooming through time. Rosa knelt and gently touched its petals. The scent was the same. She closed her eyes, and for a moment saw Miguel behind her, smiling with his eyes, offering the rose with a shy gesture. She remembered the last day she saw him, his hands still dirty from the garden, his eyes filled with tears, telling her he had to leave. She hadn't answered. She had stood frozen, swallowing all the words she didn't dare say. That night, her mother had found out everything. She had read part of a letter Miguel had written and ripped it in front of her. She yelled, threatened, cried, manipulated. And Rosa, terrified and obedient, tore the next letter herself without ever opening it. She thought that if she destroyed it, everything would go away. But it didn't. What was torn on the outside grew roots inside, like something breaking through concrete, slow, silent, unstoppable. Sitting on the garden ground, Rosa felt a blend of shame, longing, and deep regret. She thought of how much she had left unlived for fear of upsetting others, for fear of disappointing expectations. How many times had she imagined how life might have been if she had chosen love over fear? And now, standing before that single blooming rose, she asked herself the question she had never dared. Is there still time? The sound of footsteps broke her thoughts. Maybe a new resident. She stood and stepped back without being seen. She walked home in silence, her hands still scented with rose petals and her eyes filled with memory. Once inside, she sat on the porch and watched the sky turn orange with dusk. Miguel's letter still rested on the table, like a puzzle piece finally ready to fit. That night, she dreamed of the day she almost ran away with him, the day she turned back because her mother's voice called from the window. She woke up with tears in her eyes and her chest tight. For the first time, she felt something close to anger. Anger at her mother, at the way she was raised, at how blindly she had obeyed. But along with the anger came something new, hope, because now she was still alive, and maybe he was too. She decided to go back to the square. It had become her refuge. She brought a book but didn't read it. She just waited. For what? She didn't know. But something told her time was preparing to return what it had taken. She stayed there for hours. As the sun began to sink, she heard footsteps behind her. Her heart skipped. She turned slowly and saw him, the same eyes, the same silence, thick with meaning. Miguel stood a few steps away, holding his hat, time etched into every line on his face. They looked at each other for long seconds that felt eternal. Rosa gave a soft smile, her eyes glistening. Miguel walked slowly toward the bench, saying nothing. He sat beside her. And in that instant, the whole world seemed to go quiet. No words were spoken in those first minutes. Only the soft afternoon breeze moved between them, as if nature itself knew this reunion needed no sound, only presence. Miguel looked out at the square with a faint smile, though his eyes held something deeper. Rosa kept her hands folded in her lap, trying to steady the trembling in her fingers. It was him, truly him, after so many years. Miguel was the first to speak. His voice was rougher now, slower, but still carried that calm tenderness from long ago. "You still come here?" he asked. Rosa nodded, her nervous laugh escaping. "Sometimes," she replied, her eyes shining. They sat there a while longer, letting the wind speak the things they didn't know how to. His presence felt both familiar and impossible. "I kept coming by, even after I moved. I don't know why. Maybe I was hoping. Not sure." Miguel played with his hat the way he did when he was young and shy. Rosa smiled softly. "Maybe I was hoping too." That sentence lingered in the air like a prayer. They both knew this moment was too strange to be mere chance. Something bigger had brought them there. Time, maybe. Or God. Miguel then looked her in the eyes and asked, "Did you find my letter?" Rosa's heart stumbled. The question landed like thunder. She swallowed and answered honestly, "Yes. Only now." Then she took a deep breath and faced her guilt. "Back then, I tore it up. I didn't even read it. I was afraid. I only found it now, by accident." Miguel nodded with sadness, but without bitterness. "I thought maybe you never saw it. I figured you'd forgotten me. or that it hadn't meant as much to you. His voice held pain, but no accusation. Rosa felt tears rising. I never forgot. I just hid. Miguel gave her a look of such tenderness it undid her. Me too, he said. And for the first time since they had found each other again, he reached out his hand. Rosa hesitated for a second, then touched it gently. That one gesture said more than any conversation could. They stayed that way for a while, their hands lightly clasped, as if holding something delicate and rare. The world around them faded. The distant laughter of children, the creak of branches, the shifting shadows, all faded. In that moment, it was just the two of them. And for the first time in many years, Rosa felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Miguel stood slowly and said, "Would you join me for some coffee?" Rosa, still holding the warmth in her palm, smiled gently. "I'd love to." They walked side by side through old cobblestone streets they knew by heart. It was like stepping into a memory, but with new light. The past still lived in them, but something new was also beginning to grow. They found a small cafe with outdoor tables under striped umbrellas. They sat together, ordered tea and cheese bread, talked a little, shared pauses that weren't empty. Miguel told her he never married, said he worked with wood, cared for his mother until the end, and then lived quietly. Rosa didn't say much, but her eyes did. She didn't need to explain everything. Before they left, Miguel pulled a small envelope from his pocket. "Can I give you now what I couldn't before?" Rosa accepted it carefully. It was a new letter, a new note, a new chance. She didn't open it there. She tucked it against her chest, and with a shy smile she said, "Thank you for still being here." Miguel replied, "I never really left." And there, between warm tea and remade time, the seasons began to turn. Night arrived with a different kind of silence. Rosa held the new letter against her chest, sitting in her living room armchair, her gaze lost in the soft shadows on the walls. The house was quiet, but inside her, everything stirred. She hadn't dared open the envelope. Something told her she needed to be ready for those words, as if that piece of paper could shift everything once more. She took a deep breath. The name Miguel, handwritten on the front, stared back at her with both sweetness and weight. She remembered his eyes clearly, the same eyes that made her tremble at 17, and that still, even with age, carried that same blend of strength and gentleness. But now, there was something else in Miguel's gaze, a quiet mystery, as if he too held questions with no answers. Why had he never married? Why had he shown up now, after so many years? Was this fate or coincidence? The next morning, Rosa walked once more to the square. She had the envelope in her bag, still sealed. She expected to find Miguel on the same bench, maybe with his hat in his hands again. But he wasn't there. She waited and waited. The hours passed. A group of teens laughed in the distance. A cotton candy vendor passed by, whistling. But Miguel never came. Her heart began to tighten, slowly, like a door closing in the wind. On the second day, she went again, sat on the same bench, wore the same sweater, as if following a quiet ritual. She watched every person who passed. Nothing, no sign, no clue. The letter was still in her bag, untouched. But now, more than curiosity, there was fear. What if he had only come to say goodbye? What if the letter was a farewell? The thought hit hard. She swallowed it down. Doubt began to sprout like root. That night, she thought about going to his old house. But what if he no longer lived there? What if she had built all of this in her head, reviving a love that no longer lived in him? She got up from bed and wandered through the house, as if searching for something unnamed. She stopped in front of the vanity mirror, looked at her reflection. Aged, yes, but there was still fire in her eyes. On the third day it rained. And even so, Rosa went to the square. She sat under the tree, holding her umbrella in one hand and the letter in the other. The square was empty. Only the sound of raindrops kept her company. Memories rose like waves. She thought about the day Miguel was sent away by her mother. She had seen him leave from the window and done nothing. Now it felt like she was living the same loss all over again. The sound of hurried footsteps on the wet sidewalk made her turn. But it wasn't Miguel. Just a young man in a soaked coat hurrying by. She lowered her head, disappointed. She wanted time to pass quickly, but also wished it would freeze. One moment where hope still existed. She thought about opening the letter then and there, but couldn't. Something about it still felt sacred. When she got home, she made tea, sat at the table and began writing. Not a reply to his letter. She hadn't even read it, but a confession to herself. She began with simple words. I'm afraid. And it was true. Afraid to start over, afraid to feel, afraid of not knowing what to do with all of this. The words came slowly, like stitching a torn fabric with fresh thread. She didn't finish. She just left the paper on the table. The next morning, when she opened the window, there was a yellow envelope tucked into her garden fence. Her heart raced. She ran outside, not caring that her slippers were wet. She pulled the envelope from the wood. It simply said her name, written in that familiar shaky handwriting. Rosa. Nothing else. She went back inside, holding it as if it carried the universe, sat down and opened it with care. Inside, just 3 words, but they were enough to bring tears to her eyes. Sorry for the silence. Those 3 words felt like a whisper between her chest and her soul. Rosa clutched the envelope to her heart, filled with both the weight of relief and the lightness of connection. He hadn't abandoned her. It wasn't goodbye. It had only been a pause, a silence without explanation, like so many that life imposes. But somehow, he was still there, thinking of her. And for now, that was enough. Minutes later, she heard a knock at the door. She nearly dropped her teacup. She walked toward the entrance with cautious steps, opened it slowly, as if the air on the other side might dissolve the moment. It was him, Miguel, soaked from the rain, hat in hand, a shy smile on his lips. "Can I come in?" he asked gently. Rosa only nodded and stepped aside, opening not just the door, but her heart. Miguel sat in the living room armchair, looking around like someone returning to a place long imagined. "Sorry I disappeared like that. I didn't mean to. An old friend was sick. I had to leave suddenly." Rosa listened in silence. Each of his words rebuilt something inside her. "I thought it was goodbye," she confessed. Miguel smiled softly. "I was afraid you'd think that too." The air grew calmer. The rain outside became background music. Rosa brought tea and blankets. They sat together on the couch like 2 teenagers in older bodies, rediscovering the comfort of closeness. "Did you read the letter?" he asked. Rosa shook her head. "Not yet. I think I'm waiting for the right moment." Miguel looked into her eyes, then wait a little longer. Sometimes the heart needs silence before words. They talked for hours, laughed at old memories, shared peaceful pauses. Miguel said he still tended a small garden at home but dreamed of planting something new. Rosa said her house felt too big since her husband passed. "It's like an echo," she said. "Everything you say comes back only to you." Miguel understood. He'd felt that too for years. Before leaving, Miguel stood and walked to the bookshelf. He picked up the old poetry book. "This was always my favorite. You remember?" Rosa nodded. "You read it to me once, behind the greenhouse." He smiled. "That's when I knew I loved you." The words came out light and true. Rosa nearly cried, not from surprise, but from finally being able to hear it without fear. Miguel placed the book in her hands, read the marked page, "After I leave." Then he hugged her, a long, steady embrace that said more than any letter ever could. Rosa closed her eyes and wished time would pause. When she opened them again, he was already walking down the street, hunched under his umbrella. The world around her was still, but in a new way. She waited until his footsteps faded, then opened the book carefully. A pressed rose rested between the pages. It still held color, still held shape. In the corner of the page, Miguel had written by hand, "If the seasons return, it's because even the earth refuses to give up on what still lives." The next day arrived with a shy sun, as if even the sky was learning how to open slowly. Rosa woke up still holding the image of the dried rose from the book in her mind. She could almost smell it, feel its fragile texture between her fingers. It was strange how something so old could still hold so much presence. She made her morning coffee in silence, unrushed, and placed 2 cups on the table. Whether out of habit or hope, she couldn't say. She decided to visit the garden of the house where Miguel used to work. She wanted to see if something there still belonged to them. She put on a light jacket, tied her hair in a simple bun, and walked the same streets she had walked so many times in her youth. When she arrived, she leaned gently on the wall, watching in silence. The gate was closed, but she could see through the slats. The garden was a bit neglected, but not dead. In one corner, she saw that same red rose again, the one she'd noticed days before. The only flower still standing, like a sentinel of time. She approached slowly, her fingers resting on the iron bars. She wanted to cross them, but wasn't sure if she could. A man appeared on the porch and looked at her with curiosity. "Looking for someone?" he asked kindly. Rosa smiled, hesitant, "Just memories." He nodded, as if understanding without needing to ask more.
"You can come in if you'd like. No one really takes care of it anymore." Rosa thanked him and pushed the gate open gently, as if stepping into sacred ground. She walked through the dry leaves and twisted branches until she reached the solitary rose. She knelt down. It stood strong, deep red, its petals touched by time, but still open. Tied to the stem was a small piece of faded ribbon. Rosa's eyes widened. It was hers. She had tied it there decades ago. A knot formed in her throat. She ran her fingers over the petals gently. It felt as if Miguel had left a part of himself there on purpose. A promise left behind. She cried quietly, without drama, just letting the tears say what her mouth still couldn't. Why does life take from us what matters most, right when we still don't know how to fight for it? And now, was it still time to plant? She stood slowly and looked around. The greenhouse where they used to meet had collapsed, but its memory still stood whole. Rosa closed her eyes and imagined the sound of Miguel's steps on the gravel, the clink of his shovel in the soil, the soft laugh he gave when she pretended not to see him. It was all still there. So vivid, it hurt. But it was a good kind of ache. The kind that brings back what should have never been lost. On the way home, she passed a flower stand on the corner and bought a white rose sapling. She wanted to plant it in her yard, near the old jabuticaba tree. When she got back, she put on gardening gloves, grabbed a shovel, and dug the earth with steady hands. She did it all on her own, without asking for help. It was like telling the universe, "I'm ready." As she covered the roots with soil, she whispered, "This one's ours," and smiled, eyes still wet. That night, she wrote another letter, this time addressed to Miguel. She told him about the flower, the visit to the garden, the ribbon she'd found. She ended it with a question. "Did you leave that there for me? Or did time do it by itself? She folded the paper and placed it in a drawer. She wasn't sure if she'd ever deliver it, but it felt good to pour it out, even if only for herself. Some things need to be released so new things can bloom. Before going to bed, she opened the book again. She read the poem on the page beside the dried rose. It spoke of impossible meetings that insist on happening, of what is stronger than time, of the courage to bloom again, even after winter. She closed the book gently and placed it by her bedside, then turned off the light and let her heart dream. That night, she dreamed she was walking with Miguel through a field of flowers. He was smiling, she was laughing, and no harsh voice interrupted them. The next day began light. Rosa felt a kind of calm she hadn't known in years. The morning carried small rituals: fresh coffee, the creak of the gate, the warmth of the sunlight slipping through the curtains. It wasn't silence anymore. It was presence. She opened the windows wide. Inside her chest, something had changed. A part of her was blooming quietly, and she was ready for whatever came next. At 10 sharp, Miguel arrived. He had a gentle expression, wore a pale shirt, and carried a small bag of soil and a pot of basil. "Brought you something," he said. "Thought we could take care of it together." Rosa smiled from the heart. She invited him in with a look, without needing words. Miguel stepped into the kitchen, took off his hat, and set the little plant on the table like it was a gift.
They drank coffee slowly, talked about nothing, and smiled more than usual. Miguel looked out toward the backyard. "Want to go for a walk?" Rosa hesitated just a moment, then nodded. She reached for her light jacket and changed her shoes. "Let's go." No expectations, just movement. Like stepping forward into something still being written. She didn't know where they were going, only that she wanted to go. They wandered the old streets of the neighborhood, the ones that had witnessed their early glances, their stolen moments, their near misses. Side by side, sometimes their arms brushed. It felt like learning to walk with someone again, even though the rhythm was already familiar. They passed the old school, now closed, the movie theater that was now a store, the gazebo where she once saw him dancing with someone else, not knowing it was his cousin. They paused in front of a church. Miguel looked up and said, "I almost married you here, in my head." Rosa smiled tenderly. "I imagined it too." And they stood there for a while, both lost in what could have been. But it wasn't bitter. It was sweet. Because now there was a present. And when cared for, the present can be stronger than any past. They reached the lake, sat down on a wooden bench, watching ducks swim and the sunlight play on the water's surface. Miguel picked up a small stone and tossed it gently. Ripples spread wide. "You know what I've learned all these years?" he asked. Rosa turned to him. "That we never really forget. We just learned to live with what was missing." Rosa nodded. It made sense, deep sense. "So now what?" she asked softly. Miguel turned his face to hers and looked into her eyes. "Now, we try to live what's still possible." The words hovered in the air like a promise. Rosa felt a shiver. The fear was still there, but it no longer ruled her. For the first time, she wanted to say yes to something new, even if the new had roots deep in the past. They walked back slowly, laughing at little things. Miguel helped her avoid puddles. Rosa shared childhood stories he never knew. The connection felt easy, natural, like no time had passed. When they reached her gate, he paused. Rosa noticed. "Want to come in?" she asked. Miguel smiled with warmth. "Not today, but tomorrow if you'd like, I'll take you somewhere different." She raised an eyebrow, curious. What kind of place? Miguel's eyes twinkled. Surprise. He waved goodbye with a light touch to her hand and walked off. Rosa stood there, hand over her heart, Her mind raced. What was he planning? And why did her heart seem to know before she did? She went inside, closed the door behind her, and leaned against it, smiling to herself. For the first time, it felt like something good was coming, and she was finally ready to receive it. The next morning, Rosa woke before the sun. There was something in the air, a kind of sweet anticipation, like the ones she used to feel as a child the day before a trip. She looked at herself in the mirror with more affection than usual, chose a light blouse, tied her hair with care. There was a glow in her eyes, and she knew exactly why. Miguel would come, and he had promised her a surprise. At 10 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Miguel stood there, calm, wearing a pale blue shirt and holding a small envelope. "Ready?" he asked. Rosa nodded, her smile quiet but real. They got into his old, well-kept car. Neither said much on the way. The radio played softly, instrumental music, and that was enough. Miguel parked in front of a small theater. Rosa looked at him, surprised. "Are we going to a concert?" she asked. He nodded. "Just an open rehearsal. Nothing fancy, but it's special." They entered hand in hand. The hall was small, intimate, with only a few rows. The stage was bathed in soft light, and a string quartet was tuning their instruments. Rosa sat carefully, her chest already full. When the music began, the first notes were familiar. Too familiar. Rosa held her breath. It was the piece she used to listen to while hiding in the garden at 16, while Miguel worked outside trimming the rose bushes. He had once told her he loved that song. She had never forgotten. And now, all these years later, he was offering it to her, as a gift. She closed her eyes and let the music carry her. Time dissolved, layer by layer, until only sound remained, only memory. Miguel sat beside her, his eyes on her. Every small reaction of hers echoed something inside him. When the song ended, she squeezed his hand tightly. She didn't say anything, but he understood everything. They left the theater in silence, walking through the streets like two teenagers wrapped in feeling. "How did you know that was my favorite song?" she asked. Miguel smiled. "Because it was mine too, and I always hoped we'd hear it together someday." Rosa's throat tightened. There was no more room for doubt. They paused at a flower stand. Miguel bought her a single white tulip and handed it to her. "To remember today." She took it gently. Their fingers lingered longer than needed. The electricity of that moment was nearly overwhelming. They kept walking, not toward any destination, just following the path. Sometimes that's all you need, someone to walk beside you. When they reached Rosa's house, they stopped by the gate. Miguel leaned against the wall, his hands in his pockets. "Thank you for today," she said. "I needed it." He smiled. "Me too." The silence that followed was different now. It asked for something. Rosa took a deep breath, stepped forward, and their faces came close, just inches apart. Miguel looked into her eyes. His hands gently found hers. It was the moment. The kiss that youth had stolen, the kiss life had delayed. But then Rosa pulled back. One step, one breath, one old fear. "Sorry," she whispered. Miguel looked at her with tenderness. "It's okay. I'll wait." She turned and walked inside. The gate closed slowly, but her heart stayed outside, in his hands. The night was long. Rosa walked through the house as if searching for something she couldn't name. She touched objects, opened books, adjusted the curtains. The song they'd heard at the theater still echoed. But now, mixed with the music and the beat of her heart, there was something else. Guilt. She couldn't say exactly why. Maybe for having pulled away. Maybe for wanting so badly not to. She sat on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, the white tulip in her lap. She looked up at the starry sky, trying to find answers. "Why am I still afraid?" she whispered to herself. Her mother was no longer there. Society no longer controlled her. But something inside still said, "Be careful." She hated that voice, but also understood it. It wasn't easy to shed a lifetime of silence. She picked up an old notebook and began to write. She didn't know if it would be a letter, a diary, or just a place to exhale. But she needed to pour it out. She wrote about the almost kiss, about Miguel's gentleness, about the fear that rose when his lips came close. It felt like the past shouted so loudly, and she had shrunk again. The next day, she didn't have the courage to look for him. She walked to the square, but he wasn't there. She sat on the bench, pretending to read a book, but her thoughts were far away, replaying the moment at the gate, the kiss that wasn't, the step she took back. Did he understand? Or had he already started pulling away again? The question hung in her chest like a shadow. That afternoon, Rosa tended her garden. She planted the tulip in a special pot and wrote a note. "I almost kissed you. I didn't because I was afraid, not because I didn't want to." She folded it and placed it in a small envelope. She thought about delivering it the next day. Maybe it would help say what she hadn't managed to. Maybe it would finally break the silence. As night fell, she heard footsteps near the gate. Her heart raced. She rushed to the window. It was Miguel, alone, hands in his pockets, looking at the house with a quiet expression. Rosa hesitated. Should she go out? She stayed behind the curtain, watching. He turned and began to walk away. That's when she decided. She ran to the door. "Miguel!" she called. He turned around, surprised. Rosa walked toward him with the note in her hand. She handed it to him without a word. Miguel opened it, read it, and smiled, then looked into her eyes. "Do you still want to?" he asked. Rosa nodded, tears in her eyes. Miguel took one step closer, but didn't touch her. Just said, "Then call me when you're ready. I'll come." He turned and left slowly. Rosa stood still at the gate, hand on her chest. The kiss hadn't happened. Not yet. But this time, it would be her choice. And that by itself was already a kind of freedom. The days that followed were quieter than Rosa expected. Miguel didn't show up at the square, nor at her gate, nor sent another note. It was as if that "call me when you're ready" had turned into an echo that disappeared into time. Rosa tried to pretend everything was normal, but inside, something churned. The house felt larger. The ticking of the kitchen clock felt louder. Her heart more restless. She sat on the porch at the same hour every day, with the same teacup in hand. She waited for footsteps, a knock, a letter on the fence, but nothing came. The flower in the pot began to wilt, and Rosa didn't know if it was from the sun, the water, or the absence. The emptiness didn't make a sound, but it took up too much space, and she began to doubt herself. Maybe he gave up, she murmured one afternoon while watering the dry soil. Doubt grew like a root. What if he had misunderstood her? What if he thought she'd rejected him? The letter, honest as it was, wasn't a gesture, and Miguel might have needed more than words. Rosa began to ask herself, how long would she keep waiting for life to do what was already hers to do? That night, Rosa opened a chest of old memories. Inside were letters she never sent, scribbled thoughts, faded photos. She pulled out a picture of them from when they were young, laughing near a rose bush, he covered in dirt, she hiding a shy smile. It was a candid moment, probably taken by someone without them noticing. And in that photo, everything was there: truth, tenderness, possibility, and that hurt. She held the photograph for a long time, didn't want to sleep. The silence of night was sharp, and the pillow offered no comfort. She stared at the ceiling and wondered if Miguel was thinking of her too. Was he asleep? Hurting? Waiting? The doubt gnawed at her, but the inaction hurt more. Then something cracked inside her, a deep whisper. Stop waiting. It was time to move. The next morning, Rosa got dressed with care. A simple but beautiful dress. She wore perfume, tied her hair neatly, left without telling herself where she was going. But she knew. She walked to the square, then kept going through the narrow streets of the neighboring district, asking for him at the bakery, the newsstand, until a man said, "Miguel lives on the back street, last house on the left." Rosa thanked him with a trembling smile, then kept walking. She stopped in front of the gate. It was a small house, full of well-tended plants. Butterflies danced among the hanging pots. It felt like a place where presence lingered, even when no one was around. Rosa took a deep breath. Her hands shook. She clapped twice, waited. Nothing. Clapped again. Her heart beat like a drum. Then she heard slow footsteps from the back. Miguel appeared at the door, surprised. He hadn't expected to see her there. He wore a garden apron and an uncertain smile. "Rosa," he said softly. She nodded, her eyes shining. "I came because I don't know how to wait anymore." Miguel dropped the apron by the doorframe, walked toward her slowly. She didn't say another word. She simply reached out her hand, and he held it, as if he knew exactly what to do. There was no kiss, no grand gesture, just two hands reunited, and in that quiet gesture, there was more emotion than in 1,000 declarations. Miguel opened the gate, and Rosa stepped inside. This time, it was she who chose to stay. And time, oh time, no longer screamed. It whispered promises. That same afternoon, after they shared chamomile tea and shy laughter, Rosa walked slowly through Miguel's garden, eyes full of quiet emotion. The space overflowed with life, hydrangeas, lavender, ferns hanging like lace. But what moved her most was an empty patch of soil outlined by small stones. "Here's where I wanted to plant something new," Miguel said, "but I never knew what." She knelt down and ran her fingers through the dirt. "I think now you do." Miguel watched from the porch, smiling softly. They didn't talk about the future, but everything around them whispered beginnings. Rosa spent hours there, helping pull weeds, watering roots, repositioning pots. The golden light of the late afternoon wrapped everything in calm. Before leaving, Rosa sat down to write again. But this time, it wasn't a letter of regret. It was a letter of celebration. She wrote it by hand, sitting on her own porch, listening to the crickets sing. "Today, I planted something, not with my hands, but with my heart. And for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere, to your garden, and maybe to your time." She placed the letter in a small box and tucked a dried flower inside. She wanted to give it to him in person, but felt no rush. She knew now how to wait without pain. There was peace, a peace she hadn't felt in decades. That night, her pillow felt softer, not because it had changed, but because her chest was lighter. She fell asleep before midnight, which hadn't happened in years. The next morning, Rosa woke up wanting to live, wanting to cook something new, to play music loud, to open every window. The world had more color. Miguel arrived by mid-morning, holding 2 warm loaves of bread and a folded newspaper. "There's a little fair in the square today. Come with me?" Rosa smiled. No hesitation. She dressed and left with him, like someone stepping into a story already in motion. They walked through the market stalls, hand in hand. No shame, no secrets. People noticed, smiled. Maybe they saw an elderly couple living a late-blooming love. But to Rosa, it wasn't late. It was just love, and that was enough. They paused to hear a trio playing guitar and accordion. One of the songs was old, one she hadn't heard since childhood. Miguel leaned close and sang the chorus quietly into her ear. Rosa wept, without hiding. Back at the house, they had coffee and read poems aloud. Miguel opened a page at random and read, "Some flowers only bloom after the cold, and some loves only come to life after the pain." Rosa closed her eyes, absorbing every word. It felt like the poem had been written just for them, and maybe it had, because somehow each step they had taken felt guided by something beyond time. Before she left, Rosa placed the box with the letter on his table. Miguel noticed but didn't comment. He simply held her hands and said, "See you tomorrow." Rosa didn't reply. She just smiled. She knew she'd return, not because there was a promise, but because her heart already belonged. And this time, there was no fear, only the gentle certainty of being, at last, where she had always wanted to be. The days began to unfold into a new rhythm, but it wasn't repetition, it was building. Rosa and Miguel now shared slow mornings in the garden, quiet afternoons with poetry, and evenings filled with old songs on the radio. Time was no longer the enemy. It passed gently, as if learning not to interrupt what was blooming late. One afternoon, as they said goodbye, Miguel asked her to keep Friday free. "I want to take you somewhere," he said, smiling with a spark in his eyes. "Where?" Rosa asked, curious. "Somewhere our feet never reached, but our dreams visited often." She smiled. She didn't need more explanation. She already knew. It was about what they never lived. And maybe now they could. On Friday morning, Rosa woke with a heart full of youth. She packed a small bag, chose soft clothes and a cardigan. "It'll get cold in the evening," Miguel had said. When he arrived, he held 2 train tickets in his hands. Rosa trembled. The old train station, quiet and nearly forgotten, now became the starting point of something that felt finally possible. The destination? A small town in the mountains, the one they had dreamed of running to when they were young, but never dared. "Remember when we said we'd escape there?" Miguel asked as they boarded. Rosa chuckled softly. "I do. I also remember the fear that held me back." He looked at her with tenderness. But now, that fear stayed behind, and she believed him. During the trip, they said little. They looked out the window like people watching life from the outside, but no longer running from it. The fields turned golden, mist rising from the hills, and the sky shifting colors slowly. It felt like the world had been waiting for them. Rosa held Miguel's hand firmly. For the first time, she felt no rush, only gratitude. When they arrived, they were welcomed by a small inn with wooden windows and the smell of fresh cake in the air. The owner greeted them like old friends, as if she'd seen them many times in dreams. Rosa was charmed by the view, a porch with a swing, flowers spilling from the roof, and a horizon that embraced everything. Miguel simply watched, in silence, as if witnessing a promise being fulfilled. They wandered the cobblestone streets, ate fig jam, took photos with disposable cameras from a local shop. Rosa laughed like she hadn't in years. Miguel looked at her as if he was memorizing every wrinkle, every light in her face, as if each line told the story they were finally writing together. "You look different," he said, more alive. She replied, "Because now I can breathe without fear." That evening, they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, sipping mint tea. The moon was full, the sky was clear. Miguel opened a small box and took out an old rose-shaped brooch. "I bought this the week I left. It was meant for you. I kept it all these years. I think I can finally give it to you." Rosa took it with trembling hands and held it like a piece of sky. "Do you still regret not leaving with me?" he asked, eyes on the stars. Rosa took a moment, then answered with calm, "No, because if I had, maybe we wouldn't be here now." Miguel nodded. Then he pulled her close. And there, between a past that hurt and a present that healed, they stayed until sleep found them. The next day, Rosa woke before Miguel. She stepped out onto the porch and sat on the swing, wrapped in the stillness of the morning. The mountains were still covered in mist, and the sound of birds felt like an invitation to hope. In her hands, the rose-shaped brooch shimmered in the first light of day. Sitting there, she realized something deep. She no longer felt rushed or afraid. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Miguel woke soon after, bringing sweet bread and coffee. They sat together on the porch floor, like two young lovers rediscovering life. They talked about childhood, about their parents, about how life had wandered. Rosa confessed she had always been afraid of seeming fragile. Miguel said his greatest hurt had been never being sought after, and together they understood. All they ever wanted was to be truly seen. On the way back to the city, they stopped at a roadside flower shop. Miguel bought 3 rose saplings, 1 red, 1 white, and 1 yellow. "Let's plant them in your garden," he said. Rosa smiled. "I want one of them to be yours." Miguel replied, "They're all ours now, because we have a new garden to tend to." It was a promise, sealed in petals. They arrived home at the end of the day. The sky was glowing gold. Rosa placed the saplings on the table while Miguel fetched the tools. Together, they picked the sunniest corner of the yard. The soil was ready. So were their hands. They tended to each step with care, watered, spoke softly to the roots, chose every space with purpose. When they finished, they sat on the grass, dirty, tired, and happy. "Did you know the yellow rose means new beginnings?" Miguel asked. Rosa answered with a spark in her eye. "I did. That's why I chose it for us." They stayed there longer than their bodies allowed, but neither wanted to leave. The garden looked different. The house felt new, and inside Rosa, everything was blooming. Even her fears now smelled like damp earth, still there, but no longer frightening. That evening, Rosa wrote again. But it wasn't a letter to Miguel. It was to herself. A thank you letter for having been brave, for not letting life end before it was over, for returning to the garden of her soul and finding whole flowers waiting, untouched, for the right season. And that season was now. Before bedtime, Miguel asked her to come out to the porch. In the center of the garden, he had placed a small wooden sign. It read, "Our garden." Rosa laughed, moved. "It's missing a word," she said. Miguel picked up a colored pencil and added 1 word in soft script: eternal. They hugged right there, and the world felt perfectly held within that simple, quiet night. It was in that backyard that they began to dream again, not about what had been lost, but about what could still grow. Because, as Miguel had once said, the seasons always return, even for those who thought it was too late. The days began to shape themselves into a new kind of routine, but it wasn't repetition, it was building something. Rosa and Miguel now shared coffee on the porch, quiet afternoons under the jabuticaba tree, and evenings listening to old music on a dusty radio. Time no longer rushed past them. It walked beside them, gently, as if it had finally learned how not to steal what blooms slowly. One afternoon, Miguel arrived with paint and brushes, said he wanted to paint the flower pots, give the garden more color. Rosa laughed. "You've never painted anything before." He shrugged. "I never had a reason to." They sat side by side, mixing colors, smudging their hands, laughing at the mess. When they finished, Rosa looked around and whispered, "This garden has your soul now." Miguel replied quietly, "And my heart finally has a home." Later that week, Rosa opened a drawer she hadn't touched in years. Inside were unsent letters, loose thoughts scribbled on napkins, and faded photographs. She picked one up, a picture of herself at 19, smiling, whole. "This was taken before my mother destroyed what I felt," she said. Miguel held the photo gently. She didn't destroy it, she just postponed it. That weekend, Rosa invited him to stay the night. They slept in separate rooms, but it meant something. They were building trust, opening doors gently. That night, Rosa watched him sleeping, bathed in the moonlight. She thought about how true love, even when silenced, could survive for decades. Starting over at the right time was more radical than starting young. The next morning, Miguel seemed a little off, said he felt tired. "Maybe just the heat," he said. Rosa made cold tea, asked him to rest longer. They spent the day in calm silence. She read to him, rubbed balm into his hands, wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. He smiled. "I never imagined I could be this happy with so little." She smiled back. The right little is worth more than the wrong too much. That evening, as she tidied the bedroom, she found a folded note on the nightstand. Miguel had written it. "If I ever leave before you do, please keep watering the flowers." They're proof that what we lived was real. Rosa sat down, tears in her eyes. It wasn't goodbye. It was something deeper, a kind of preparation, a love that didn't vanish, just transformed. She folded the note carefully and placed it in her poetry book. Along with it, she pressed a white rose petal. A few days later, Miguel caught a small illness. Nothing serious, but his body asked for rest. Rosa cared for him like someone who had found the missing piece of herself. She made soup, read him his favorite pages, told him stories from when they were young. One afternoon, sitting side by side in the garden, she asked, "If you had the chance, would you do everything differently?" Miguel thought for a moment. "No, because even with all of it, the ending brought me here, and here is everything." That night, Rosa dreamed of a field of flowers. Miguel was there, waiting for her with yellow roses in his hands. When she reached him, he whispered, "It's time to bloom, without fear, without turning back, without guilt." And then they danced. No music, no rush, just danced, and the field became sky. Months later, Rosa sat on the same porch swing where she had first felt peace return. Miguel was asleep inside, after a short walk around the block. Next to her was a pile of notebooks, pages full of memories. Words that used to weigh on her chest were now written softly in ink. Leah, her neighbor, stopped by every week to help type them up on the computer. "This should be a book," Leah often said. Rosa would smile. "If it helps someone believe it's not too late, then let it be written." And so Leah typed. Each chapter, each fragment, each season of Rosa and Miguel. Slowly, the love that was almost buried became seed in other people's gardens. Rosa understood now. Their story wasn't just theirs. It belonged to everyone who had given up too soon. Miguel read everything, slowly, carefully. He made notes in the margins and said, "You have a gift for words." Rosa would reply, "I just wrote what time taught me." And that was true, because sometimes time doesn't steal, it gives back. But you have to be brave enough to open the door when it knocks. Rosa had opened it, with trembling hands, but she had opened it. One day, while rearranging books, Rosa found the note Miguel had written. "If I ever leave before you do." She gently folded it and placed it between the pages of the poetry book. She added a dried white rose beside it. It still held its color, still held its meaning, and she understood. Nothing truly dies when it's lived fully. Miguel passed on a clear morning. No pain, no warning, just drifted off. Rosa found him asleep on the porch, a book in his lap, a soft smile on his face. She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She simply took his hand and said, "Thank you for coming back." And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone, because love was still there, everywhere. The funeral was simple, surrounded by flowers from their garden. Rosa read a passage from the book. She spoke of time, of second chances, of quiet courage. At the end, she said only, "He taught me how to water what I thought was dry. And I promise, I'll keep watering." In the months that followed, Rosa finished the book. She gave it the name Miguel had suggested, Rosa's Seasons. The first copies were shared in the neighborhood. Letters came from all over. Readers said they cried, remembered old loves, found hope again. Rosa read each one, and in every word, a new flower bloomed inside her. One golden afternoon, Rosa walked barefoot to the garden. The 3 roses were blooming. She sat in the grass, her feet in the dirt, and whispered, "I kept my promise." A butterfly landed on the yellow rose. The wind blew softly, and in that moment, she understood something. Love doesn't die. It just changes seasons, and some seasons come back when you least expect them.